Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whatever you're doing. I'm Ian Banner. This is an Agile Bite. Agile Bites are short videos that are delivered to your inbox rather, nearly every Friday morning. Depends on my workload. Today's title: How to Double Your Team's Output and Value, Part 2. By the way, I think there's an apostrophe missing in Teams. I do apologise. So you should have seen a video last week on this: How to Double Your Team's Output and Value, Part 1. I would urge you, if you didn't manage to get hold of that, can't see why, you should have got them in the right order, but if you didn't, go and watch or listen to that one first. That's 10 minutes. Just to recap though, I'm talking about productivity, how a team becomes hyper performant, and it's based on the work of this man, Jeff Sutherland, who I met when I did my original Agile Scrum training in Oxford several years ago, and it's work he pioneered a while ago, and it's part of the, for want of the way of putting it, the foundations of Scrum and Agile and the Agile Manifesto is this work. And if you recall, last week we had this diagram, which is how a team doubles its output over time. And there are a couple of circles on there that I didn't explain last week very well. I want to come back to them really. Just to recap, a circle is a team. A team is a bunch of people, all of whom have to do something together in order to get something done. Doesn't mean they all report to the same person. Doesn't mean they're all in the same place. As you can see, those diagrams, the efficiency of the team improves over time. The red arrows are team members, by the way. So what I really want to talk about today is continuous and automatic testing, which is this circle here, which I've circled again in red on the notes. And I want to tell you some stories about how continuous and automatic testing has really improved the productivity of projects I've worked on personally. So what do I mean by automatic testing? Well, I mean testing that's done by computers, not by human beings, not manually. And continuous means testing that's always available and can be run all the time. And so if it was a manual system, perhaps a person is testing a computer system and that person can run 5 test scripts a day. So over a week they run 25. If you automate that, usually a computer can run those 25 scripts in a minute, in a moment, instantly, and can run them at all sorts of times. And once they're automated, they can be repeated again and again and again. And there are lots of software systems that allow you to create continuous and automatic testing, or CAT as it's called for short. And I just want to mention a couple of them in the IT arena, and then I'll talk about outside of IT. So the first thing is in the IT arena, where a story from my days at Telefonica, where we had a very large dev team, maybe 15 devs, all working on a website, all working on code. And every time the code was finished by any of the devs, it was put into the code repository using JSON and Jenkins, and using Jenkins, forgive me, using Jenkins, not JSON, Jenkins. And I remember many days when we'd sit there and someone would put some code into the repository. As soon as it was logged in, scripts would start running on that code and test all kinds of scenarios where the code was involved on the website working. And we'd see essentially a gas bar, which is a horizontal line that started all red and started to become more and more green from left to right as it passed tests. And literally we'd all look at this computer screen, big TV screen in the corner, that was showing the tests carried out on the piece of code that had just been checked back in. And we would watch it as it passed, and if it got all the way to the green, there were cheers and I would buy donuts. And if it didn't, if it got to a point where it got stopped because there was a problem with the code not working, it would go red, and the person who did the code would have to buy coffees for everyone. So you get the idea of what it can do. Now, I can't even remember emails I wrote last week sometimes. And I used to code for a living. So the idea that I would code and maybe a few days later get the code back with a fault in it and wonder what it was, you know, it's not very productive, is it? The whole arena of, or agenda of, documenting your code so brilliantly that anyone could look at it and understand what you're doing is all because somebody else might look at it later. It's good to document, by the way. I'm not saying don't document your code. I'm just saying that entire agenda, part of that can be very inefficient in explaining why you're doing certain things in code. And part of that reason is so you can look at it again a couple of weeks later when a fault comes back and you go, what was I doing? So imagine the efficiency improvements if instead you finish coding in the morning, you have like lunch, and during that hour all sorts of automatic tests are done on the code in the test system, and you come back from lunch with a test report of thousands of tests that have been carried out on that piece of code, and if there is a fault you can immediately look at it and work out what it was. In fact, I was telling this story on a course, and a manager on the course told me the story of when he was a coder, where he worked on a piece of code for the British defence industry. I don't want to say more specifically than that. And he was a contractor at the time, and he came in and he got a specification and he coded. He wrote the code over 2 weeks, and it was released to test. And then he's given another spec, and another piece of code was written, and that was passed the test. And actually, he worked there for 6 months. And all he did every day was code based on a document he got, and it was sent to test. And he never got any test results back, or didn't even know what the tests were, got no feedback at any time. At the end of 6 months, he left. And to this day, he doesn't know whether any of his code ever got tested. Can you see how I've described two complete diametric opposites on a spectrum? One is, the coders don't get involved in testing in any way. The other, there is a huge swathe of immediate testing that comes back to you, and how efficient that can be. And Jeff would argue, and I'd agree with him, that a continuous and automatic test system can double the productivity of your team. So if you've got, a team that's costing you, I don't know, 200k a month to run, and you run it for a year, then investing in continuous and automatic testing creates huge benefits. Your team will finish quicker, or they'll get a lot more done in terms of output to the customer. A few more stories. One very recently at Sopra, actually, where we worked on a system that was a website system essentially for business process re-engineering. And again, we had a couple of teams writing code for processes that were used by our client company. And we employed someone who used a Selenium, which is a sort of scripting automation package that works on websites. And what that person did was they took the tests that were carried out on each sprint that we did some dev in, and automated them. And then every night, well, every morning, about 5 a.m., all those tests would run. Essentially, all the tests we've ever done on the code as it was developed over 9 months. Every test, every unit test we did was rerun overnight, every night automatically. And at 8 a.m. in the morning, every senior manager and the heads of each of the teams got a report, lovely graphical report, donuts on it, everything like that, showing that all the code was working, or if it had fallen, what had gone wrong. Now, in this development system, every day we would put the code back in that we'd worked on, and so every night that set of essentially regression tests would run. And you come in the following morning and find out whether the code you wrote yesterday had passed all the regression tests. It's a fantastic system, and it doubles the productivity of the whole team. So if you're on a team and that team is behind schedule, or the money's going to run out, and you're wondering what to do about that and how you might square that circle, well, get continuous and automatic testing in. In the end, that will completely increase your productivity. It'll double it. It's like having another team working all the time. Let's talk about a few examples of continuous automatic testing as a principle outside of code development, because not all projects are code development, are they? I'll give you another example of one where some switches were being replaced in a big network. So these are the switches that you are used to for network traffic. A whole swathe of these switches needed replacing. We had a system that was measuring the network topology every night and showing it. So when one switch had to come out because it was end of service and another switch went in, what would happen is there would be some regression tests on the switch to make sure it worked and did its job correctly. But then the following day we'd look at the network topology reports to see that the network was still performing efficiently overall, or balancing correctly, etc. And assuming it did, another switch was put in and swapped. And so over time, you can refresh a whole set of hardware, tins and wire network, and you're using continuous and automatic testing. One completely nothing to do with IT, just as a story. I write books, and so I'm currently working on a book on Scrum called Agile Transformation, Tactics from the Trenches, and I'm currently working on chapter 17 of that book. And what happens is every night when I finish a chapter or any writing I've done, it automatically gets sent to my proofreader, who's a good friend of mine, Lindsay, lives in Sheffield where I live. She gets it automatically and she proofreads the section I've written. And not only does she look for typos, but she looks for sentences that don't make sense, should be better written. And then the following day or the following next moment when I'm about to write again, I see what she's commented on and do some editing. So in a sense, I'm using continuous and automatic testing to write a book, because every time I write any length at all, it gets tested and checked by a brilliant copy editor. That copy editor looks at it in context of everything else I've written so far. If I make the same point twice, she notices that, etc. So that's essentially another example of continuous and automatic testing. It doesn't have to be in IT. So as I finish this particular Agile Bite, as usual, there's a homework shower challenge. In case you don't know, I like to give a little shower challenge at the end. The idea is it's something you think about, but you don't need to sit down and write an essay or anything. It's just something you can do in those moments when you're physically doing something but your brain's not that active, such as your daily shower. And so the challenge today is this: how can you incorporate this idea of continuous testing into something that you do? Something somewhere, football, maybe you're in a club, maybe you're at church, maybe it's something to do with your job. You don't have to think of testing as just IT. Testing is simply the quality check that something is of a high enough quality. Just thinking off the top of my head, for example, I'm about to go on a car journey. Maybe every morning my son, who doesn't have a lot else to do, checks the tyres and the gauges on the tyres of our car to make sure the air's fine and things like that, and also checks the petrol levels, and if there is enough petrol, and he goes and fills the car up for me. And he does that sort of fairly early in the morning before I sort of am about using the car. That is a form of continuous and automatic testing, because I don't have to worry about that once I've given it him to do. I hope all that makes sense. I think we're at the end now. Don't forget the survey, please. There is a survey at the bottom of where you saw this video. If you click on that, it'll only take you 30 seconds. Just helps me to tune the material that we write for the next quarter, etc. Also, if you know anyone else who would benefit from these videos, there should be a link also just below the link for the survey, which you can send to anybody, and they will get a chance to join us in the Agile Bites Club. So that's it from me for this week. I hope you have a great weekend or week, depending on when you watch this video, and you'll be hearing from me again soon.